My husband, Marcus Sterling's, voice sliced through the heavy French doors, sharp and clear even over the soft, upscale lounge music I had chosen for his guests. It was that familiar, low, self-satisfied rumble he used when he was performing for his male audience. I was standing frozen on the balcony of our luxury high-rise in Chicago's Gold Coast, a silver tray of perfectly seared Wagyu steaks cooling rapidly in my hands. I doubt this joke of a marriage will survive another year. She's nowhere near my level, man. The laugh that followed was a collective snort of approval from his friends, Caleb Davies, Scott, and Jake. Through the glass, I watched them, bathed in the soft glow of the skyline and the expensive custom lighting. They raised their glasses, crystal tumblers filled with the 2001 Petrus I'd specifically bought to celebrate an upcoming milestone. They were sitting on the custom-made outdoor sectional, eating food I had spent 2 hours preparing, on the terrace of the condo I'd bought with the proceeds from my first major corporate acquisition. They were toasting Marcus's public declaration that I, Victoria Hayes, was an anchor, a burden, a woman beneath him. Caleb, who always tried to position himself as the most insightful, actually stood up to slap Marcus on the back, muttering something about how a strategic visionary deserves better. My body felt strangely calm, a kind of icy, professional disconnect taking over. I placed the steak tray down on the side table with unnerving stillness, the gentle clink of the metal against the marble surface the loudest sound in my world. For 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity, I simply watched. I watched Marcus, my husband of 17 years, preen under the false validation of his friends. I watched him accept the praise for his plan to discard me, glowing with pride as they confirmed his utter contempt for the woman who had not only built the platform they were sitting on, but also the $200 million company that afforded them this life. I remembered the early days of Ascend Analytics. I was running a successful freelance operation from a cramped apartment in Old Town when I met Marcus. He was charming, full of big talk and disruptive ideas. I loved his ambition, or what I mistook for it. He'd talk about being a visionary, the kind of leader who saw 10 steps ahead, while I was the executor, the grunt worker who handled the boring stuff like payroll, client contracts, and closing 9-figure deals. The massive Atlas Solutions expansion contract, the one that currently accounted for 1/3 of our revenue, was one such boring detail. I'd flown to the West Coast, sat through 11 tense negotiation meetings, and rebuilt our entire service offering to land it, all while Marcus was at an exclusive poker retreat in Miami, assuring me he was networking. "How long have you been plotting this, Marcus?" Scott asked, swirling his wine with the learned arrogance he displayed when he was trying to sound smart. "Months," Marcus replied, dropping his voice conspiratorially. "Ever since Victoria closed that massive Atlas deal. She acts like she single-handedly saved the company. The ego on her lately is unbearable." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to shatter the glass separating us. Ego. The execution, the very grunt work he mocked, was what allowed him to drive his customized Porsche, wear his $5,000 bespoke suits, and entertain his cronies in this meticulously curated space. I mentally ran through the graveyard of his failed dreams. The crypto trading platform that vanished with $250,000 of my seed money. The subscription box service that never launched with $150,000. The mindfulness app that disappeared after consuming another $100,000. Each failure chipped away at the savings I created. Yet, in his narrative, he had built the company from nothing, and I was merely the lucky administrator. Scott grabbed another bottle. "You need someone who appreciates what you bring to the table, Marcus." Someone who understands that being a visionary isn't about the day-to-day. The day-to-day. That day-to-day had taken us from a spare bedroom to a sprawling floor in the financial district with 45 highly paid employees. The execution was why he could afford to spend his Thursdays here, reinforcing his toxic self-narrative and planning his wife's humiliation. Vic's changed, Marcus lamented, adopting a wounded tone. She used to support my dreams. Now she just throws numbers in my face. Revenue this, profit margins that. She doesn't understand that business is about more than spreadsheets. Jake laughed, the sound utterly repulsive. Sounds like she's become one of those typical corporate drones, all execution, no vision. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Samantha, my COO. Vic, the Titan contract is officially a go. $15 million expansion. You did it again. Ready to sign tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. I had the single most important contract signing of my professional life scheduled for 10 a.m., a deal that would secure our future valuation. And here was my husband, the man whose name was still legally tied to mine, calling our marriage a joke, planning to destroy me while I was on the cusp of a triumph he could only dream of achieving. The thing is, Marcus continued, taking a large, greedy gulp of the aged wine, I've been documenting everything. Every decision she makes without consulting me. Every time she undermines my authority with the staff. My lawyer says I have a strong case for taking at least half the company, maybe more. I picked up the cold tray of steaks. I felt the surge of cold, pure resolve. They hadn't seen me yet, but they were about to. I pushed the French doors open with the tray, letting the reality of my presence slam into their faces. I was ready to play a real game, not the pathetic one they had orchestrated. The moment I stepped through the heavy French doors, the silence was immediate and absolute, like a conductor abruptly cutting a symphony mid-crescendo. The light summer breeze from Lake Michigan that usually made the Gold Coast balcony so pleasant seemed to freeze around us. Marcus's wine glass, filled with the 01 Petrus I'd specifically bought to celebrate our 10th anniversary, froze halfway to his lips. Victoria, Vic, his voice, which minutes ago had been a confident, arrogant rumble, was reduced to a pathetic, strained whisper. We were just shooting the breeze. Guy talk, you know. Just venting. I set the silver tray of cold Wagyu down on the nearest marble-topped console. I didn't let it clatter. The movement was quiet, deliberate, and final. My hands were steady, my voice a low, measured tone, the one I reserved for terminating a contract with a vendor who had failed to meet critical deadlines. Why wait a year, Marcus? I asked, my gaze sweeping deliberately over his three friends, Caleb, Scott, and Jake. Caleb was instantly pale, already fumbling for his phone. Scott found his expensive Italian loafer fascinating. Jake, the one who'd laughed loudest at the joke of a marriage, actually leaned back so fast he nearly knocked over the custom-built fire pit. I wouldn't want you to endure another 12 months married to someone so far beneath your level, I finished, allowing his exact insult to hang in the cool Chicago air. Marcus, my husband of 17 years, simply stared. For the first time, the charming, practiced veneer he wore cracked completely. No quick excuse, no charming deflection. Just silence. His friends looked like statues of cheap plaster, caught in a tableau of shared guilt and sudden, paralyzing fear. I didn't stay for the inevitable cascade of lies and frantic apologies. I simply turned and walked back through the French doors. My footsteps on the polished, dark, Brazilian hardwood floors of the living room echoed, heavy, final, and carrying me toward the sanctuary of the master suite. Behind me, I heard the frantic screech of chairs against the granite patio, the panicked whispers of men realizing their private conspiracy had just exploded in their faces. The master closet was a sanctuary, a museum of my accomplishments. I pulled out my largest Zero Halliburton suitcase, a gift to myself after closing our first 9-figure deal, and laid it open on the Italian silk duvet of the bed we had shared. My actions were driven by a cold, surgical resolve. I folded my bespoke blazers, packing only the items that were unequivocally mine, the jewelry bought with my personal bonus checks, the designer bags that represented milestone corporate victories Marcus had claimed as ours. I moved to the massive ensuite bathroom, gathering my expensive skincare routine. These items were not vanity. They were an investment in my sanity, one of the few things I had control over while managing Ascend Analytics and a marriage to a man who secretly resented my competence. My medicine cabinet yielded the vitamins and the occasional sleeping pill I'd needed more frequently as Marcus's Thursday night strategy sessions had grown longer and louder. Heavy, pounding footsteps, multiple sets, hesitant and disjointed, came up the marble staircase. They sounded like guilty children. "Victoria, please. Can we talk about this?" Marcus appeared in the bedroom doorway, his expensive hair now disheveled from running his hands through it. Caleb hovered behind him, his face a sickening mix of fear and something I recognized as dawning regret. I zipped my toiletry bag shut and placed it meticulously in the suitcase. "There's nothing to discuss, Marcus. You've made your position clear. I'm beneath you. Our marriage is a joke. You've been meeting with your lawyer about proceedings. What precisely would you like to discuss?" The color drained from his face at the mention of his lawyer. "How did you?" I pulled my business laptop bag from the closet, the one containing every password, every client contact, every piece of intellectual property I had personally developed for Ascend Analytics. The same way I know about the separate corporate bank account you opened in January. The same way I know you've been telling potential investors that I'm emotionally unstable and hurting the company with my ego. Caleb, who had been trying to shrink into the hallway, flinched violently. It was the depth of that reaction that made the terrifying picture complete. "It was you, Caleb," I stated, looking directly into his eyes. "You sent me that anonymous message an hour ago. Check your husband's Thursday night meetings. You need to know what he's saying about you." Marcus spun around to face his best friend, his face contorting with a sudden, ugly rage. "You warned her." Caleb straightened his shoulders. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked less like an accessory and more like a man finally standing up for the truth. "I've been sending her screenshots for 3 weeks, Marcus. Every message in our group chat where you talked about hiding assets. Every discussion about Project Valkyrie. Every time you bragged about how you were going to take half of everything Victoria built while painting her as the unstable villain. Project Valkyrie. The sheer theatricality of the cruelty elicited a sharp, humorless laugh from me. You actually named it, like it was some military operation, instead of just systematically destroying your wife's reputation. Scott and Jake, the 2 remaining musketeers of malice, crept closer, drawn by the catastrophic failure unfolding. "The Thursday night gatherings," Caleb continued, his voice steadying, "were never about poker, Vic. They were planning sessions. Marcus would tell us his strategy for documenting your supposed instability, taking photos of you working late to prove you were neglecting the marriage, recording conversations out of context, building a case that you were the problem while he was the long-suffering husband. I folded my final item, a silk scarf, the one I'd worn when the company rang the NASDAQ bell. "And you all just went along with it," I said, looking from Caleb to Scott and Jake, who were completely unable to meet my gaze. "You thought what? That it was funny? That it was justified? That I deserved to be professionally and personally destroyed because I had the audacity to be successful?" The silence was crushing. I closed the zipper on my suitcase with a decisive, whirring sound. Marcus's jaw worked furiously, searching for the words to salvage the unsalvageable. I knew he couldn't unsay what I'd heard, or undo 3 months of premeditated destruction. I grabbed the handle of my case. There was only one step left. I closed the bedroom door behind me with a quiet, yet utterly final click. The faint noise felt louder than any door slam, signifying the sealing of the past. The wheels of my Zero Halliburton whispered against the hallway carpet as I passed the gallery wall of our wedding photos, each frame now feeling like a grim monument to promises that had meant absolutely nothing to Marcus. Behind the door, I could hear the immediate, toxic eruption. Marcus's fury, now redirected entirely at Caleb, the friend who had exposed him. I didn't look back. This luxury high-rise in Chicago's Gold Coast, this $20 million view, was a cage I had paid for. Leaving it felt like a tactical victory, a strategic withdrawal. The elevator ride down, usually swift, moved with an agonizing slowness, giving me too much time to reflect. I was shedding an entire version of myself. The woman who believed love required constant, silent compromise. The executive who minimized her own massive achievements to protect a fragile, narcissistic male ego. The wife who paid the bills while pretending not to notice her husband was plotting her professional execution. That woman was gone. I stepped into the opulent lobby of the building, a structure I still had an ownership stake in, and walked straight past the concierge desk. I refused to look like a woman fleeing. My posture was military straight, my expression an unreadable mask of professional detachment. A short ride later, I checked into the prestigious Langham Hotel downtown. I paid for a week in the executive suite using a personal investment credit card Marcus didn't even know existed. My financial independence fund, meticulously built from bonuses and silent investments I had learned to shield over the years. Financial independence, I thought, gripping the card receipt, was the essential oxygen that allowed you to breathe when a partner tried to suffocate your life. The suite on the 48th floor was impeccable. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the electric landscape of the Chicago skyline. It was sterile, perfect, and blessedly free of history. No memories, no ghosts, just an empty, perfect space ready for the future. My phone had been vibrating continuously. Marcus's name flashed repeatedly on the screen, his messages tracing the predictable arc of a narcissist caught. Rage, manipulation, false apology, and finally, threats. "You're destroying Ascend Analytics with this stunt. The board will crush you." I set the phone on the marble bathroom counter and turned on the shower, letting the water heat until the room was a thick, cleansing fog of steam. Standing under the high-pressure cascade, washing away the residual grime of the betrayal, I finally allowed myself to feel the profound, crushing weight of it all. 17 years. 17 years spent building a life with someone who had been coldly documenting my destruction, gathering evidence for a war I didn't even know we were fighting. The tears came then, hot and stinging, mixing with the shower water. They were not just for the betrayal, but for the profound, searing humiliation of my blindness. All those early mornings, I'd kissed him goodbye. All those presentations where he'd stood beside me, taking credit for my intellectual property. I had been an unwitting actress in a meticulously choreographed tragedy. I stayed under the water until it ran cold, until my skin was pruned and my eyes were swollen. I cried out not just the end of a marriage, but the death of the naive version of Victoria who believed she could tame and manage a man's insecurity. When I emerged, wrapped in the hotel's thick, plush robe, the city below was twinkling, manageable, like a complex problem that could be broken down and solved with the right strategy. I ordered room service, not out of hunger, but out of a need to remember how to prioritize my own preferences. Seared scallops, not his usual heavy steak. A crisp Pinot Grigio, not his overaged Scotch. And a chocolate torte because Marcus had always called dessert frivolous calories, and I suddenly felt a rebellious need to embrace the frivolous. I knew who I needed to call. Jennifer Klein, the city's most formidable corporate divorce attorney, known for her brutal efficiency and absolute lack of tolerance for male entitlement. "I've been waiting for this call, Victoria," Jennifer's voice answered on the second ring, carrying the authority of a general. Caleb Davies already sent me a detailed overview of the situation. My fork stopped. "Caleb contacted you?" 2 hours ago. He's ensuring you have everything you need to protect yourself and the $200 million asset you built. He's prepared to provide sworn testimony about Marcus's financial manipulation and the conspiracy to manufacture evidence of instability. Jennifer's tone was purely matter-of-fact. "Can you meet me at 8 tomorrow morning at my office? Bring any documentation you have. Bank statements, company records, communication logs. Everything." I agreed, then spent the next 3 hours organizing files on my laptop, creating folders with the kind of obsessive, detailed labeling that had made Ascend Analytics successful. Marcus's failed ventures contained the meticulous documentation of every dollar I'd poured into his pipe dreams. $250,000 into the crypto platform, $150,000 into the subscription service, $100,000 into the failed app. Company contributions held every contract I'd negotiated. Financial manipulation was a folder waiting to be filled with the hard evidence of his treachery. I was prepared. The old Victoria might have crumbled, but the new, forged version was ready for war. Precisely at midnight, a hesitant, almost apologetic knock sounded on the door of my 48th floor suite. I looked through the peephole. It was Caleb. He looked diminished, standing in the hallway clutching 3 heavy bankers' boxes stacked awkwardly in his arms. His usual confident, tailored image was gone, replaced by a profound, palpable sense of shame. I opened the door without a word, stepping aside to let him enter. He set the boxes down on the coffee table with a soft thud, the weight of my shattered past delivered in cardboard. Caleb stood awkwardly in the center of the immaculate suite, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said finally, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that watching Marcus poison everyone against you while you were literally keeping the company afloat, it's been eating at me for months." "Then why, Caleb?" I asked, my voice calm but penetrating. "Did you go along with it for so long?" He sank into the hotel suite's armchair. At first, it was just typical guy talk, complaining about marriage. But then it became something else. He started taking notes during your calls, screenshotting your texts out of context, building this whole sick narrative where you were the villain. And we just validated him. We enabled him because it was easier than confronting him. I approached the first banker's box. Inside were manila folders labeled in Marcus's bold, familiar handwriting. Financial discrepancies, emotional instability evidence, asset documentation. The documents were truly horrifying. Printed emails I'd sent him about normal business operations were heavily annotated with his twisted interpretations. A simple text about budgeting became proof of controlling behavior. A request to review a contract became disrespect for authority. He had systematically twisted every single interaction into evidence for a fictional story. "This goes back to January," I said, holding up a folder dated 8 months prior. "He's been planning this since the beginning of the year." Caleb nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Right after you closed the Atlas expansion deal. That's when he really changed. That deal made it absolutely clear who was really running Ascend Analytics. His ego couldn't handle it." The second box contained something worse. Photographs. Pictures of me at my desk at 11 p.m. taken through the office window. Screenshots of my professional posts, annotated with comments about my narcissistic need for validation. He even included photos from a charity dinner where apparently my 3 glasses of champagne were evidence of an escalating drinking problem. "He asked us to collaborate," Caleb continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Scott was supposed to report if he saw you at lunch with any male clients. Jake tracked your social media for anything that could be twisted. I was assigned to monitor your relationship with the staff, looking for any signs of what Marcus called inappropriate professional boundaries." The third box was the most damning. It contained financial records, evidence of Marcus setting up a shadow company, registering an LLC in Nevada, and covertly approaching our existing clients. The name on the paperwork was Sterling Strategic Ventures, deliberately similar to Ascend Analytics. My phone buzzed, a text from Samantha. "Emergency. Marcus just sent an all-staff email claiming you're having a mental health crisis, and he's taking temporary control. What do I do?" I showed Caleb the message. His face went pale. "He's escalating faster than we thought." I called Jennifer Klein immediately, putting her on speaker. "Marcus just sent a company-wide email claiming I'm having a mental health crisis. Forward it to me now." Jennifer's voice was sharp with cold focus. "I'm filing an emergency injunction right now. This is defamation and corporate fraud. Caleb, are you there?" "Yes," he answered, straightening in the armchair. "I need you to send me everything you have about Project Valkyrie immediately. Every message, every meeting note. Victoria, do not respond to that email. Do not contact your staff directly yet. Let me handle this legally first." After Jennifer hung up, Caleb and I worked in silence, organizing the digital documents, building the comprehensive case that would protect not just my company, but my professional reputation. At 2 a.m., he finally asked the inevitable question. "Do you hate me, Victoria, for not speaking up sooner?" I looked at him, recognizing the cost of my honesty. "I don't know what I feel, Caleb. You watched my husband plan my destruction for months. You participated. The fact that you grew a conscience doesn't erase that." He nodded, accepting the judgment. "My fiancée, Amelia, threatened to leave me if I didn't come forward. She said if I could watch this happen to you, she'd never be able to trust me." "Smart woman," I said, meaning it. I had been too focused on saving my company to save my marriage. Amelia was focused on saving her future. The truth was, Caleb's confession, while painful, was the critical turning point that would allow me to dismantle Marcus's entire structure of lies. The clock on the wall of the Langham suite now read 3 a.m. Caleb was finishing the organization of the physical documents, and the scale of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Marcus hadn't just been planning a divorce. He'd been planning a professional obliteration, a calculated move designed to seize control of a $200 million company by leaving me discredited and financially ruined. Suddenly, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number from a restricted area code outside Chicago. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Victoria, this is Diana, Scott's wife." Her voice was tight with fear and fury. "I almost didn't call, but I just found out what they've been doing. Scott came home drunk tonight from your house, and he told me everything. I'm disgusted. I want you to know I have recordings." Recordings. The evidence was piling up, illustrating a deeper, darker truth. The toxicity Marcus was exporting wasn't merely corporate. It was a destructive philosophy of spousal control. "I started recording him after the 3rd week," Diana continued, her voice gaining a desperate, righteous strength. Something felt wrong. Scott was always talking down to me, suddenly demanding receipts for my spending, making me feel crazy about simple things. I have hours of him describing their plans, laughing about how you had no idea what was coming, and talking about Marcus's strategic relationship management playbook. Another ally emerging from a completely unexpected corner. It proved that Marcus's playbook was a universal danger. "Can you send them to my lawyer, Diana?" "Already uploaded them to a secured cloud drive. I'll send you the link." "Victoria, I'm filing for divorce too. If Scott could participate in something this cruel and calculating against you, a friend's wife, what else is he capable of? What would he do to me if I ever out-earned him?" Diana had instantly recognized the pattern. A partnership with a man who could enable such malice was fundamentally unsafe. Minutes later, a direct message popped up on a professional social network. It was from Lena, Jake's girlfriend. I'd met her twice. Quiet, observant, the kind of person who noticed everything. "I need you to know what Jake was planning with Marcus," her message read. "I'm ending things with him, but you deserve to see this first." Attached were screenshots that made my blood run cold. They were detailed plans for approaching Ascend Analytics clients after the divorce. They had drafted emails, created a timeline for client poaching, and even designed logos that deliberately mimicked our company's branding. The worst part was the list of employees they planned to recruit, with notes about each person's vulnerabilities. "Samantha, single mom, needs stability, will follow the money." They had studied my team like predators studying prey. Lena's final message: "Jake doesn't know I have these. I'm sending them to your lawyer too. No woman should have to deal with this level of betrayal." The sheer extent of the planned corporate theft was staggering in its malice. This wasn't just pathetic, it was professional destruction. I forwarded Emma's screenshots to Jennifer Klein immediately. Jennifer's response was swift and decisive. "This changes everything. We're adding corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially RICO charges to our leverage. He'll have to accept whatever terms we offer now." Caleb finally stood to leave at 4 a.m., gathering his coat with movements that suggested deep exhaustion. At the door, he turned back, a look of profound, genuine regret on his face. "The greatest irony, Vic," he said softly, "is that Marcus thought he was a strategic genius, but he failed to account for the fundamental human decency of the women you all married. That was the flaw in his entire Valkyrie strategy." I closed the door behind Caleb and stood alone in the silence. The sun was just beginning to hint at its rise over the Chicago skyline. For hours of sleep would have to be enough. Today's board meeting would determine not just the future of Ascend Analytics, but whether Marcus's carefully constructed narrative would finally collapse under the crushing weight of documented truth. I chose my sharpest black suit, emphasizing resilience, and prepared for the corporate gauntlet. Jennifer Klein called me just as I was leaving the Langham. Her voice crackled with professional triumph. The emergency injunction went through, Victoria. Marcus is legally barred from accessing Ascend Analytics accounts or making any operational decisions without explicit board approval. He'll receive notice this morning, probably right before the meeting. He's going to be furious. I stepped into the waiting black car. Let him be. Anger makes people sloppy, Jennifer. Precisely. I've also sent the full evidence package, including Diana's recordings and Lena's evidence of corporate conspiracy, to each board member individually. They'll have had time to review it before you all gather. The corporate tower of Ascend Analytics stood in the financial district, a glass and steel testament to 2 decades of my relentless work. I arrived at 6 a.m. Only the security guard and the overnight cleaning crew, who nodded to me in recognition, were present. They had seen me here at all hours over the years. Caleb was already in the conference room, arranging printed documents with methodical precision. He had not slept. We worked in silence, creating stations of evidence around the massive glass table. Financial records at one end, client testimonials at another, and the damning Project Valkyrie documentation displayed prominently on the main screen. He'll try to spin this as a marital dispute that shouldn't affect business, Caleb said, adjusting the projection screen. That's his opening move. Make it personal, not professional. And when he does that, I countered, my voice low and firm, that's when we show the LLC filing for Sterling Strategic Ventures. Nothing says professional betrayal like trying to steal your own clients while still drawing a salary from the company you claim to lead. Samantha, now my temporary COO, arrived at 8 a.m. The team is solid, Vic. They know who built this. Half the staff is ready to testify if needed. The other half is just waiting for the smoke to clear so they can go back to work. The board members began arriving at 9:30 a.m. Margaret Chin, our CFO, was first, her expression a mask of stern professionalism. James Harrison, from our largest client, was invited due to his company's massive stake in our stability. At 9:55 a.m., Jennifer Klein entered and sat beside me, her presence a clear signal that this was no longer a business discussion. It was a legal confrontation. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus walked in. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, the scent of his expensive cologne preceding him. He paused when he saw the room's configuration. Caleb beside me instead of with him, Jennifer Klein's intimidating presence, the board's severe expressions. His eyes found Caleb, and the look that passed between them could have ignited a firestorm. Caleb didn't flinch. Marcus recovered quickly, his salesman's smile sliding into place as he took his seat. I appreciate everyone gathering on short notice, he began, pulling out note cards. I know there have been concerns about recent disruptions to our leadership structure. I want to assure you that despite my wife's current emotional instability, I can. I'll stop you right there, Mr. Sterling, Margaretchen interrupted, her voice sharp and precise. We've reviewed the documentation provided by Ms. Hayes's legal counsel. Your claims about her mental state appear to be not just unfounded, but deliberately fabricated. Marcus's smile flickered, his confident facade beginning to crack. I understand Victoria has painted a certain picture, but The picture was painted by your own messages, Mr. Sterling. James Harrison held up a printed screenshot. This group chat where you discuss Project Valkyrie, where you strategize about documenting false evidence of instability. These are your words, are they not? I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, displaying Marcus's own message. Keep documenting everything. We need to show a pattern of erratic behavior, even if we have to create it. The room went silent. Marcus's face cycled through shock, anger at Caleb's betrayal, and finally, desperate calculation. Those messages were taken out of context, he tried, sweating slightly. Caleb clearly has his own agenda here. My agenda, Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice steady, is making sure the truth is known. For 3 months, I watched you plan to destroy the woman who built this company while you contributed nothing but obstruction and stolen credit. You were part of it. Marcus burst out, his voice desperate. You sat there every Thursday, participating, encouraging. Yes, Caleb said simply. I did, and I was wrong. The difference is I'm trying to make it right. I advanced to the next slide. Financial records showing every major contract over the past 24 months, color-coded by who had actually closed the deal. My column was solid blue. Marcus's was empty white space. Over the past 2 years, I began, my voice carrying the quiet authority I'd earned. I've personally closed 17 major contracts, totaling $55 million in revenue. During that same period, Mr. Sterling has closed 0 contracts while drawing an annual salary of $400,000. James Harrison leaned forward. Victoria, we need to be clear about something. My company has never considered Marcus a factor in our decision to work with Ascend Analytics. Every strategic discussion, every campaign adjustment, every innovation has come from you. We've tolerated his presence out of respect for you, but he's never contributed a single valuable insight. The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized his largest client had just publicly, definitively dismissed his entire professional existence. He was utterly exposed. The conference room felt like a suffocating cage around Marcus. The weight of the evidence, meticulously laid out by Jennifer Klein and me, was crushing the last vestiges of his fabricated confidence. He was no longer the charming, visionary executive. He was a desperate man caught in a web of his own making, facing 4 unyielding board members, his betrayed wife, and his contrite former friend. I clicked to the final, damning slide. It displayed the official registration documents for Sterling Strategic Ventures, his shadow company, designed explicitly to steal our clients. This concludes my presentation, I said, my voice steady and final. The board has all the evidence needed to make an informed decision about the company's future leadership structure. I can assure you, with or without me, the Atlas expansion contract is ready to sign tomorrow, which will secure a $35 million revenue increase. The choice is between continuity and documented conspiracy. Marcus's attorney, a junior lawyer overwhelmed by Jennifer Klein's sheer presence, finally spoke, leaning toward his client. Mr. Sterling, we need to discuss your options privately. The message was clear. The legal battle Marcus had been planning was over before it began. He had no defense against corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Margaret Chin stood, smoothing her skirt. We will reconvene tomorrow morning to formalize the transition, Mr. Sterling. I suggest you use the time to consider Ms. Klein's buyout offer carefully. It's significantly more generous than what any court might determine, given the evidence. The meeting dissolved quickly. Board members approached me to quietly confirm their support. James Harrison shook my hand firmly. We move forward with you, Victoria. Ascend Analytics is you. Marcus remained seated, staring blankly at the projection screen where his own damning words about Project Valkyrie still glowed. Caleb paused at the door, looking back at his former friend with an expression of profound, sad pity, then left without speaking. That evening, back in the silence of my Langham suite, I received the final emotional blow. My phone rang with a call from Diana, Scott's wife. "Victoria, I have to tell you everything," Diana began, her voice raw with fresh pain. Scott finally broke. He told me Marcus's coaching went beyond just us. It was a network. Marcus had been hosting annual retreats, not just Thursday poker, where he taught men how to systematically undermine their wives' confidence, especially if the wife was the higher earner. He called it the quiet coup. My stomach churned. The quiet coup? He made a philosophy out of emotional abuse. Yes, I found Scott's financial documents. Marcus was secretly running a seminar series, charging these men for lessons on strategic relationship management, basically teaching them how to emotionally and financially gaslight their wives into submission or divorce. Your divorce was supposed to be his case study, proof that his method of seizing assets from a high-earning woman worked. I felt a cold rage. Marcus wasn't just a resentful husband. He was a predator running a manipulation cult. "I'm taking Scott to court, Vic," Diana stated. "I have evidence of the payments he made to Marcus for these seminars. I'm filing a police report for corporate theft. Marcus stole my intellectual property ideas for my own startup. I want him to face the consequences, not just for you, but for all of us." I immediately forwarded this new, shocking information to Jennifer Klein. The fact that Marcus was profiting from teaching spousal abuse elevated the entire case from a civil matter to a dangerous, predatory crime. Jennifer's immediate response was a single, chilling text. "Perfect. We're changing the final offer. He gets the watch, his clothes, and a civil fraud lawsuit that will ensure he never works in this city again. He won't see a dime of Ascend Analytics' money. The shame, the betrayal was no longer just mine. It was a shared experience with dozens of other women Marcus had tried to victimize, either directly or through his quiet coup seminars. I realized my story was no longer just about survival. It was about exposing a toxic movement. 6 months passed with the slow, necessary pace of deep institutional and personal healing. I moved out of the Langham and into a beautiful, historic brownstone in Lincoln Park, a space that felt grounded, rooted, and completely untouched by Marcus's toxic presence. Ascend Analytics didn't just stabilize, it exploded. With Marcus's obstruction removed and Samantha, now officially so, at my side, we closed the Atlas deal and secured 3 new major clients who had been waiting for the leadership situation to clear. Our valuation, post-audit, was confirmed at $200 million. Caleb, now the director of business development, worked with relentless dedication. Though I still felt the residue of his initial silence, his actions were transparently geared toward atonement, making him an invaluable ally. The morning of the divorce finalization arrived, bright and cold, a stark contrast to the dreary weather that marked my departure. I wore a new, tailored crimson suit, a symbol of power and confidence. Jennifer Klein met me in the lobby, her expression sharp and formidable. In the small conference room, Marcus was waiting. The transformation since the board meeting was horrifying. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 8 months. His clothes were ill-fitting, his expensive cologne replaced by the faint, unpleasant scent of desperation. His lawyer, a public defender recommended by a legal aid clinic, looked terrified. "The terms remain as discussed," Jennifer Klein announced, her voice precise, sliding the final settlement across the table. "Ms. Hayes retains full ownership of Ascend Analytics, all investment accounts, the Chicago property, and all associated intellectual property. Mr. Sterling receives his personal belongings, the crypto wallets from his failed ventures, and they are legally worth nothing, and his grandfather's watch. No alimony. No future claims on the business. The non-compete clause stands for 5 years, extended to include any type of strategic relationship management, consulting, or seminar work." Marcus's signature, shaky and almost illegible, was nothing like the arrogant flourish he once used. He couldn't meet my eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was a pathetic rasp. "I know you won't believe me, Victoria, but I'm truly sorry." I looked at him then, at the hollow shell of the man who had destroyed his own life through sheer arrogance. "You're right, Marcus," I said, quietly, firmly. "I don't believe you, but your apology is irrelevant. You are irrelevant." He signed the last page and left without another word, his departure a whisper of a man who had once demanded center stage. 2 weeks later, the Forbes journalist, Catherine Wells, arrived at my office. She wanted the raw truth about discovering betrayal and transforming it into fuel for massive success. "Tell me about the night you found out," she said, her recorder placed between us on the enormous conference table. I told her everything. The cruel mockery, Caleb's confession, the insidious Project Valkyrie, the revelation of the quiet coup seminars, and the sheer audacity of his corporate theft. "What strikes me," Catherine noted, "is that your revenge was pure, unadulterated success." "The best revenge," I replied, looking out over the revitalized city, "is building something so successful that the person who tried to destroy you becomes utterly irrelevant." Marcus thought I was beneath his level. Now he's working at a low-tier marketing startup in Milwaukee, while I'm running a company valued at $200 million. The universe provided the justice. I simply provided the documentation. Catherine Wells's article hit the digital newsstands with a headline that captured the imagination of every high-earning woman in America. How Victoria Hayes built Ascend Analytics to $200 million while divorcing a saboteur. The article was a massive viral sensation, reaching tens of millions of readers within its first week. My inbox was immediately flooded. The messages were no longer just from my corporate network. They were from women aged 45 to 65 across the country, sharing harrowing stories of spousal resentment, hidden bank accounts, and the suffocating pressure to diminish their professional lives. They thanked me for giving them a name for their experience, the quiet coup, and for showing them that financial autonomy was the only true antidote to emotional control. A month after the divorce, a letter arrived, forwarded from a post office box in Milwaukee. It was Marcus's handwriting, shaky now, filled with what was supposed to be an apology. But the delusion persisted. He wrote about our success, about how he had helped build the company, and about being a victim of circumstances. He had the audacity to suggest that I hire him as a consultant for my next venture. I filed the letter in a folder marked evidence, /closed, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk. It was a stark reminder that some people can stand in the ruins of their own making and still fundamentally believe they are the hero of the story. The company holiday party that year was held at a prestigious venue downtown. I reserved the entire upper floor to celebrate not just our financial metrics, but our collective survival. As dinner concluded, Samantha, now my official COO, stood to make a toast. To survival, she said simply, her eyes bright with tears, and to leaders who earn their titles instead of stealing them. Then Margaret Chen, my CFO, stood up. Since we're sharing, she began, gripping her glass, my ex-husband convinced me I was terrible with money. Me, with a master's degree in finance from Wharton. He'd check every receipt, question every expense, until I nearly quit finance altogether. I realized he was simply terrified of my salary. Then my lead developer, Kyle, cleared his throat. My ex-fiancé used to introduce me as the guy who plays video games when I was building the code base for Ascend. She said real men wore suits and worked in banking. The stories poured out like a cleansing flood. Every person in that room, from the highest executive to the newest intern, had been diminished or controlled by someone who should have lifted them up. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were survivors. The evening transformed from a corporate celebration into something far deeper, a collective acknowledgement that Marcus's behavior wasn't an anomaly, but a pervasive, toxic pattern in American corporate and personal life. I stood watching my team, filled with a quiet, powerful sense of solidarity. We were all adults, all fighting for the right to be fully seen and valued. 11 months after the finalization of the divorce, the invitation arrived. Cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering for Caleb and Amelia's wedding. I debated attending. The wound of Caleb's initial complicity, those 3 months of silence, was still a sensitive spot, despite his eventual courage. But Amelia had called me personally, her voice warm and genuine. You saved us both, Victoria, she'd said. Caleb from becoming someone I couldn't love, and me from marrying that person. The ceremony took place at a breathtaking, historic estate near Lake Geneva. I sat 3 rows back, close enough to witness the genuine, hard-won love between them, but far enough to maintain a respectful distance. Caleb looked nervous in his tuxedo, constantly adjusting his bow tie until Amelia appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in simple, sophisticated ivory silk. She looked like a woman who trusted the man waiting for her, a trust that had been built on honesty and painful reckoning. During the reception, after the family toasts, Caleb stood unexpectedly, tapping his champagne flute. The large tent fell silent. His eyes found mine across the room, and I knew this speech was not for the general crowd. It was for his own soul and for me. Before I talk about Amelia, he began, his voice carrying the weight of practiced, deeply felt words, I need to address something. 11 months ago, I participated in something shameful. I watched a friend, Marcus Sterling, plan to destroy his wife's reputation and career, and I not only stayed silent, I enabled him. I took screenshots, I documented conversations, I allowed myself to be a soldier in what he called his quiet coup. The silence in the tent became absolute. Amelia stood beside him, her hand firmly on his arm, her expression proud. Victoria Hayes is here tonight, Caleb continued, and head swiveled to find me. She built a $200 million company while her husband planned her downfall. She showed grace when I finally found my conscience at the 11th hour. But the real hero of this story is my wife, Amelia, who told me that night that if I didn't warn Victoria immediately, she would leave me. She said, and I'll never forget this, if you can watch this happen to her, how do I know you won't do it to me someday? The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous, a collective validation of the courage of honesty. Amelia kissed Caleb's cheek, whispered something that made him smile, and I raised my glass in acknowledgement of an apology I hadn't expected, but profoundly respected. Later, Amelia found me at the bar. "He tortures himself about those 3 months," she said quietly. "He realizes that the only way to earn my trust was to fully betray his so-called friendship with Marcus." "What happened, Amelia," I replied, meaning it. "We all got where we needed to be. You made him a better man, and I realized I didn't need to save a bad one." We spoke about the resilience required for people in their 40s and 50s to start over, the courage it takes to end a long-term marriage and admit that a significant portion of your life was built on a lie. Her deep understanding of the human cost of deceit gave me comfort. 3 weeks later, planning my mother, Clara's, 75th birthday party became my next focus. The event coordinator at the country club, the same woman who had handled my anniversary party, didn't mention the irony. The grand ballroom would host 80 guests, 3 generations of Hayes women and the friends who had supported us. My professional life had given me a powerful platform, but seeing my mother's extended family gather reminded me that true stability lay not in revenue, but in kinship. The night of my mother, Clara's, 75th birthday party was perfect. She stood at the center of the grand ballroom in an elegant emerald gown, surrounded by her sisters, my cousins, and my teenage niece, Grace, who had just won a statewide coding competition. Looking at them, I saw my family's evolution, my grandmother's generation, who had been taught to be silent, my mother's generation, who worked twice as hard, my generation fighting for equality, and Grace's generation, who simply expected fairness as their birthright. My heart swelled with a quiet, profound sense of belonging. I was a successful CEO, but here I was Victoria, a daughter, and an aunt. Mom pulled me aside near the dessert table, the champagne making her more honest than usual. "I saw it, you know," she said quietly, her eyes focused on a distant point. "How Marcus dismissed your achievements, how he took credit for your work. I should have said something. I was stunned. My parents had always been diplomatic, never interfering in my marriage. Why didn't you, Mom?" She looked across the room at my father, steady and supportive after 50 years. My generation, Victoria, was taught that marriage was sacred and private, that interference caused more harm than help. We were taught to be resilient, but resilience in our time often meant silence. I was wrong. She reached out and took my hand, her grip firm. "Watching you rebuild, seeing you thrive after he tried to destroy you, it taught me more about marriage than 50 years of being in one. I should have spoken up when he first started diminishing you. I let him make you feel small in front of me." "I might not have listened, Mom," I admitted, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes the humiliation had to be mine before the resolve could be mine. You did the best you could with the wisdom of your time." Her apology was a rare, beautiful act of generational honesty, an acknowledgement that silence can be as damaging as outright betrayal. This profound moment, rooted in the maturity and wisdom of a woman in her mid-70s, was more valuable than any apology Marcus could have offered. It was about healing the intergenerational wound of women who had sacrificed their voices. This conversation became a personal turning point. It solidified the humanitarian theme of my journey, the discovery that even late in life, the wisdom of our elders, when finally spoken, can catalyze our final, most important growth. 2 days later, back in the city, I met with Samantha and Margaret to discuss my new venture. It wasn't just a side project. It was a passion project, a digital platform dedicated to financial literacy and confidence building for women over 45 who are either divorcing, widowed, or entering retirement. The core message: it is never too late to take control of your assets, your narrative, and your future. I had the capital, the audience, thanks to the Forbes article, and the fierce conviction born of personal experience. This venture, tentatively named the Phoenix Fund, felt different. It wasn't about conquering the market. It was about serving a community. It was about taking the bitter lessons of my life and turning them into actionable, accessible advice for others. I felt a quiet, powerful joy as we outlined the business plan. This was my true legacy. 3 weeks after my mother's celebration, I was in a high-end specialty grocery store near my Lincoln Park brownstone, selecting olive oil for a dinner party I was hosting for the first round of investors in the Phoenix Fund. The party was a testament to my completely independent future. I was comparing prices on a premium Sicilian brand when I saw him. Marcus. He stood in the pasta aisle, comparing the prices on generic house brand dried pasta with the tense, focused concentration of someone who had to account for every dollar. His clothes were cheap, ill-fitting, and noticeably rumpled. The expensive watch was gone, and the pale indent on his finger where his wedding ring, once set, seemed to mock his former grandeur. He looked up, and our eyes met across 15 feet of organic produce and broken promises. For a moment, he started to move toward me, his mouth opening as if to speak a name he no longer had the right to utter. I saw a flicker of his old charm, followed immediately by shame and desperation. But something in my expression stopped him mid-step. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was a profound, devastating indifference. He was no longer a villain. He was simply a stranger occupying a space in the same aisle. I looked through him as if he were transparent glass, a faded figure from a past life. I returned my attention to the olive oil labels, utterly unmoved, my mind focused entirely on the dinner menu and the future of the Phoenix Fund. Marcus abandoned his half-full cart, a visual echo of the life he had abandoned, and walked quickly toward the exit, his shoulders hunched, like a man fleeing a ghost that only he could see. I continued shopping, adding fresh basil and imported cheese to my basket. The encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it was the true, final closure of our relationship. The man who had tried to destroy my professional life with surgical precision was now a ghost in a grocery store, incapable of registering even a flicker of emotion from me. The final power move wasn't revenge. It was the profound realization that he had become completely irrelevant to my new, flourishing life. I went home that evening and prepared for my investors' dinner. I was launching a platform to empower women over 45, using the hard-won lessons of my own resilience. I felt a powerful, quiet joy. I had found happiness not in a relationship, but in purpose, independence, and the dignity of having fully reclaimed my own narrative at the perfect time in my life. The bitterness was gone. Only strength and an immense sense of possibility remained. This is the end of the Marcus Sterling chapter of my life. What he tried to bury, my talent, my drive, my worth, I dug up and built an entire new foundation upon. My true net worth isn't the $200 million valuation of Ascend Analytics. It's the quiet, unshakable confidence of Victoria Hayes, a woman who proved that professional success and personal dignity are not mutually exclusive, regardless of your age or marital status. My advice, especially to those of you who are watching this and find yourselves in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, feeling trapped, overlooked, or diminished, is this: the betrayal is a gift. It is a harsh, brutal, and terrifying gift, but it is a necessary wake-up call to the life you were meant to live without compromise. The humanitarian lesson here is that resilience is a resource that deepens with age. You have decades of accumulated knowledge, professional skill, and a formidable network that no toxic partner can ever truly take away. Do not let shame or the societal pressure to maintain appearances prevent you from reclaiming your worth. The most profound realization I had was about the power of female community, the courage of Amelia, Diana, and Lena, the corporate loyalty of Samantha and Margaret, and the healing truth of my mother, Clara's, delayed confession. We need each other to confirm our reality and validate our capabilities. If you're facing a personal or professional breakdown, remember this simple truth. You are not defined by the person who left you or the role they assigned you. You are defined by the empire you build, the truth you speak, and the resilience you demonstrate in the face of what was supposed to crush you. The greatest victory is simply moving forward, fully and unapologetically, into the life you deserve. I hope my story gives you the courage to look at the shadows in your own life and turn on the lights. If Victoria Hayes could find her true purpose and build a new legacy, the Phoenix Fund, at 52, what new chapter are you ready to write? Thank you for allowing me to share this incredibly personal and defining chapter of my life.